November 2024. A milestone that seemed impossible just years ago becomes reality. Nvidia, the tech company powering artificial intelligence across the globe, shatters every record in corporate history by becoming the first company ever to reach a $5 trillion market valuation. Think about that number for a moment. $5 trillion. That's more than the GDP of every country on Earth except the United States and China. This is the company that powers ChatGPT, enables self-driving cars, runs every major AI system transforming our world, and has made its CEO one of the wealthiest people alive. Wall Street analysts call it the most important technology company of the 21st century. Tech giants like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta depend entirely on Nvidia's chips to build the AI future. Without Nvidia, the AI revolution simply doesn't happen. But this story of unprecedented success didn't start in Silicon Valley boardrooms or with venture capital millions. It started with a young immigrant boy scrubbing toilets at a reform school, working as a dishwasher at Denny's, and dreaming of something bigger while his family struggled just to survive. This is the extraordinary true story of Jensen Huang, the man who transformed from minimum wage worker to architect of the AI revolution, building the most valuable company in human history against impossible odds. Chapter 1. Humble Beginnings. The boy from Taiwan. Jensen Huang was born in February 1963 in Tainan, Taiwan, into what might be described as a middle-class family facing extraordinary uncertainty. His father worked as a chemical engineer while his mother managed the household. But Taiwan, in the 1960s, was a nation still recovering from decades of conflict and political instability. The family wasn't poor by Taiwanese standards, but they certainly weren't wealthy. And like millions of families across Asia during that era, they faced a difficult choice: stay in familiar surroundings with limited opportunities, or take an enormous risk by immigrating to America in search of a better future for their children. When Jensen was just 9 years old, his parents made the agonizing decision to send him and his older brother to live with relatives in the United States, while they stayed behind in Taiwan to continue working and save money. Imagine being 9 years old, separated from your parents, sent to a foreign country where you don't speak the language, don't understand the culture, and have no idea when or if you'll see your family again. This wasn't a comfortable relocation to a nice suburban neighborhood. The relatives Jensen and his brother stayed with weren't wealthy, and resources were extremely limited. The boys found themselves enrolled not in a regular American school, but in Oneida Baptist Institute in Kentucky, a Christian reform school originally designed for troubled youth from Appalachian communities. Life at Oneida Baptist Institute was brutal for young Jensen. This wasn't a prestigious boarding school with manicured lawns and inspiring teachers. It was a strict, no-nonsense institution where physical labor and discipline were considered essential parts of education. As one of the few Asian students in a school filled with troubled kids from rough backgrounds, Jensen faced relentless bullying. Students mocked his accent, made racist comments, and sometimes threatened physical violence. But perhaps nothing captures the humbling reality of those years quite like Jensen's daily chore assignment: cleaning the dormitory toilets. Every single day, this 9-year-old boy from Taiwan scrubbed toilets used by dozens of other students. It was degrading work, the kind of task designed to teach humility and build character through sheer unpleasantness. Years later, Jensen would reflect on those toilet cleaning days with surprising gratitude. "I learned that no task is beneath you," he said in interviews. "If you're willing to do the work that nobody else wants to do, if you can find dignity in tasks that others consider degrading, you develop a resilience that becomes your greatest strength." That resilience would be tested again and again throughout his teenage years. When Jensen's parents finally managed to immigrate to America and reunite the family in Oregon, the financial struggles didn't end. They intensified. His father, despite being a trained chemical engineer, struggled to find work that matched his qualifications. Language barriers, lack of American credentials, and simple discrimination made professional employment nearly impossible. The family lived paycheck to paycheck, constantly worried about making rent and putting food on the table. As a teenager, Jensen took on multiple minimum wage jobs to help support his family. He worked as a dishwasher at Denny's, spending hours in steamy kitchens, scraping food off plates and loading industrial dishwashers. He worked as a busboy, clearing tables and dealing with difficult customers who sometimes treated service workers with contempt. These weren't just after-school jobs for spending money. This was survival. Every dollar Jensen earned went toward helping his family keep the lights on and food in the refrigerator. But even while scrubbing dishes and clearing tables, something was happening inside Jensen's mind. He was watching, learning, analyzing how things worked. He noticed patterns in the restaurant business, which tasks created bottlenecks, where inefficiencies existed, how better systems could improve everything. That analytical mind, constantly seeking to understand and optimize systems, would eventually become his greatest asset. Chapter 2. The Stanford Years. Discovering his path. Despite all the challenges, the poverty, the multiple jobs, the family stress, Jensen excelled academically. His grades were exceptional, and he possessed a particular talent for mathematics and science that teachers noticed immediately. When it came time to apply for college, Jensen set his sights on the most prestigious engineering programs in America. In 1979, at just 16 years old, Jensen was accepted to Oregon State University for his undergraduate degree, where he studied electrical engineering. But that was just the beginning. After completing his bachelor's degree, Jensen applied to Stanford University for graduate school and was accepted into one of the most competitive engineering programs in the world. Walking onto Stanford's campus in 1983 as a graduate student, Jensen was once again the youngest person in his class, just as he'd often been throughout his academic career. But this time, instead of being the poor immigrant kid scrubbing toilets, he was surrounded by some of the brightest engineering minds in the world. Stanford in the early 1980s was an incredible place for anyone interested in technology. Personal computers were just beginning to emerge from hobbyist garages into mainstream consciousness. Silicon Valley was transforming from an agricultural region into the global center of technological innovation. Companies like Apple, Intel, and HP were proving that revolutionary technology companies could be built right here in Northern California. At Stanford, Jensen focused on electrical engineering with particular interest in computer architecture, how processors are designed, and how they handle computational tasks. This was the era when computer graphics were primitive, when video games consisted of simple pixelated shapes, and when the idea of computers rendering realistic images seemed like distant science fiction. But Jensen saw something others missed. He recognized that as computers became more powerful, the demand for better graphics, for visual computing, would explode. That insight, formed during his Stanford years, would eventually change everything. During his time at Stanford, Jensen also met his future wife, Lori, who was studying at Oregon State. Their relationship would become a cornerstone of stability as Jensen prepared to take enormous risks in his professional life. Chapter 3. The Birth of Nvidia. Betting everything on a vision. After completing his master's degree at Stanford in 1985, Jensen joined LSI Logic, a semiconductor company where he worked on chip design. The experience was invaluable, teaching him the intricacies of how processors are manufactured, tested, and brought to market. But working for someone else's company, executing someone else's vision, felt increasingly limiting. Jensen had ideas, big ideas, about where computing was heading, and he needed the freedom to pursue them. By the early 1990s, Jensen had become convinced of something that seemed almost laughable to industry veterans. The future of computing wouldn't just be about faster processors for spreadsheets and word processing. The future would be visual. 3D graphics, realistic rendering, immersive experiences, these would drive the next revolution in computing. In early 1993, Jensen Huang, at age 30, sat down at a Denny's restaurant booth, the same chain where he'd once washed dishes as a struggling teenager, with two partners, Chris Malachowski and Curtis Priam. Over coffee and pie, they sketched out the business plan for what would become Nvidia on paper napkins. The mission was audacious: create a new type of processor specifically designed for graphics and visual computing. Not a general-purpose CPU like Intel made, but a specialized chip optimized entirely for rendering images and accelerating visual tasks. They called it a graphics processing unit, a GPU. Convincing investors to fund this crazy idea proved incredibly difficult. Most venture capitalists couldn't understand why anyone would need specialized graphics chips. Computers are for business applications, spreadsheets, databases, investors told them. Graphics are a niche hobby for gamers and researchers. There's no real market there. But Jensen persisted, eventually securing $20 million in initial funding, an enormous sum for a startup in 1993. The pressure was immense. Jensen and his co-founders weren't wealthy. They had families to support, mortgages to pay. If Nvidia failed, they wouldn't just lose their investment. They'd lose everything. The company's first product, the NV1, launched in 1995, was actually a commercial failure. It used the wrong graphics rendering approach, and game developers didn't want to work with it. Many startups would have died right there. But Jensen learned from the failure and pivoted quickly. Chapter 4. The Breakthrough: Inventing the Modern GPU. In 1999, Nvidia released the GeForce 256, the world's first true GPU. This chip didn't just accelerate graphics, it fundamentally transformed what computers could do visually. Suddenly, realistic 3D gaming became possible on consumer hardware. Video editing became accessible to everyday users. The entire visual computing landscape shifted. The GeForce 256 was a massive commercial success, and Nvidia quickly became the dominant force in graphics processing. The company went public in 1999, and Jensen Huang transformed from struggling immigrant to Silicon Valley success story. But Jensen wasn't satisfied with dominating gaming. He saw something even bigger on the horizon. In the mid-2000s, researchers discovered something remarkable. GPUs, originally designed to render graphics, were actually exceptional at a completely different task: parallel processing for artificial intelligence. The same architecture that made GPUs perfect for rendering millions of pixels simultaneously also made them perfect for training neural networks. Jensen recognized this immediately and pivoted Nvidia's entire strategy toward AI and machine learning. Even though most of the tech industry thought he was crazy, why would a graphics card company care about AI? Critics asked. Jensen's answer would eventually prove visionary beyond anyone's imagination. Chapter 5. The AI Revolution: Building a $5 trillion empire. By the 2010s, artificial intelligence was transitioning from academic curiosity to world-changing technology. And every single AI breakthrough, every advance in machine learning, every improvement in large language models, every development in autonomous vehicles depended on one thing: Nvidia's GPUs. When OpenAI built ChatGPT, they used tens of thousands of Nvidia chips. When Google developed its AI systems, they relied on Nvidia. When Tesla built self-driving technology, Nvidia powered the training. Jensen had bet everything on a vision that seemed absurd: that specialized processors for visual computing would somehow become the foundation of artificial intelligence, and that bet paid off beyond anyone's wildest imagination. By 2024, Nvidia's market valuation had skyrocketed to $5 trillion, making it the most valuable company in human history. Jensen Huang, the boy who once scrubbed toilets and washed dishes, became one of the wealthiest individuals on Earth. But perhaps more importantly, he became the architect of the technological revolution, defining the 21st century. Today, Jensen still wears his signature leather jacket to work. He still remembers cleaning those dormitory toilets at age 9. He still recalls the humiliation of being bullied, the struggle of working minimum-wage jobs while his family barely scraped by. Those experiences didn't just build resilience, they built perspective. "I learned that no task is beneath you," Jensen often says. "I learned that dignity comes from doing your absolute best at whatever task is in front of you, whether that's scrubbing a toilet or designing a revolutionary computer chip." From dishwasher to $5 trillion empire builder. From immigrant kids scrubbing toilets to architect of the AI revolution. Jensen Huang's journey proves that extraordinary success isn't about where you start. It's about resilience, vision, and refusing to let circumstances define your potential. The next time you use AI, remember, it's powered by chips designed by a man who once cleaned toilets for a living.